Pleasure to be here to talk to you a little bit about how do we mitigate the impacts of stress. Anyone in this room experienced stress before? Okay, so yeah, over here, we know the topic extremely well. And in the next 30 minutes, what I really want to do is talk a little bit about the impacts of stress, but also ways, recovery strategies that we can use to almost stress-proof our brain. So that's going to be the focus of the talk today. I want to start a little bit talking about high performance and how stress and recovery fits into all that. As Kevin said, I've been very fortunate in my 18-year career to have competed and consulted on the world stage. So I started my career actually as an athlete. So I played for Team Canada for about almost over a decade, and then transitioned into this world of performance psychology where I've been fortunate to work with Olympians, professional athletes. So I have this amazing learning laboratory in which I've been able to learn factors and components that relate to high performance. I imagine in this room there's a few people interested that are a little bit driven, high performers, maybe don't incorporate the recovery aspect as much. And so within that learning lab, we really I've been able to develop this model of high performance. And I'm not here to talk about that, but one component of this model is high performance recovery. It's not the demand and stress that is the issue. That's not going away. Sorry about that one. It's more around the lack of intermittent recovery strategies that influence us. And so to start, I thought I would share a little bit, as Kevin mentioned, for this last Olympic Games at the 2018 Olympics, I had two roles. So one of them was the lead psychologist for the Canadian Olympic team. And then secondary, I had one team that I was working with, so it was Ski Cross Canada. And has anyone here been to an Olympic Games or have watched it on TV? Okay, so I've been to a couple now, and I don't know if you can tell, I've got high energy, I galvanize off environments and people, and going to an Olympic environment is like having an IV full of Red Bull coursing through my veins. I'm switched on in those moments. And so knowing that, what I needed to do prior to going there was to make sure that I had my high performance recovery plan. Let alone the Olympic Games is full of twists and turns and it's really intense. And so I needed to make sure for me to be on for those Olympians that have trained their life to get there, I needed to make sure that I was in the right place. And so a high performance recovery plan in action looks something a little like this. So first of all, one component of it is managing our mind so that we can think clearly and to manage the stress in which from the environment in which it's being produced. And so mindfulness. We've all heard of mindfulness. I'll be talking about it a little bit later. So part of my recovery plan, I signed up for a mindfulness course about 4 months prior to going to the games. It was a 8-week course. I went once a week. It made me accountable, and I had my daily practice back up and started. At the games, I would just drip it in. So when I was on the bus and had a few moments, I would do about 10-15 minutes of mindfulness. When I was walking to the cafeteria, I would slow it down and do a mindful walk. I think the point here with some of these practices is it's not something extra necessarily that we need to do, but yet we've got to figure out ways to incorporate it into our already busy schedule. So that would be one tactic. Another one, we know eating for energy or the nutrition piece. And in different countries, and when you travel, I'm sure, how many people travel a lot for work in this room? A few, or had traveled a lot for work in this room. It's not always easy to manage your nutrition, right? And so for me, what I did is I just made sure I had a nutrition-dense portion every morning. And so I use what was called athletic greens. There's a variety of products out there, but that was something to get what I needed, my daily dose, right from the very beginning. Started that a month out before the games and used that during the games. Probably the only staff member that did not get sick, I would have to say there. Always about movement and exercise. There's this great TED Talk. If you just Google or Bing, depending on your platform, exercise in the brain. It's a doctor in neuropsychology talking about it. But the impacts of exercise, and it's not getting into the gym every day necessarily, it's making sure that you're incorporating and that you're moving every day. So for me at the games, a workout wasn't always viable. I'd get off the bus stop about 20 minutes from the venue and I'd do a brisk walk to the venue. So that would be an example. And so the point here, I'm sharing this story to tell you that sometimes I think one of the biggest barriers to making sure that we have recovery in our schedule, people talk about time. And so it's a matter of coming up with creative ways in terms of how do we infuse this. So what I want to talk about now, or what I want to shift into a little bit, is the impacts. So if we don't do this recovery, if we don't stress-proof our brain, what are some of the impacts? And since we're at this lovely golf course, I thought I'd use a sport example, right? Anyone in the room golf? Okay. Anyone watch golf? Anyone watch The Last with Tiger and the whole thing? Yep. And so I'm going to show an example of the impacts of stress on the brain. My good friend Jordan Spieth, he's not my friend. I'd love him to be my friend, but I think he's pretty amazing. So Jordan Spieth, I don't know if anyone recalls the 2016 Masters, going into the back nine with a 4-stroke lead. And I just want to show you a quick video of how that played out.
The agony of defeat and the famous golfer reaching out to Jordan Spieth tonight. Jordan Spieth trying for his second Masters win in a row.
Opening par.
The 22-year-old known for his nerves of steel in the lead, but then the 12th hole. Right into Rays Creek.
He's getting up.
He swings again.
Oh my goodness.
His third shot at redemption.
Unbelievable. I'm losing count, Frank.
And when it was over, a quadruple bogey.
Just not right now in the face.
You can understand why he wanted that camera away. His hands to his face, he watched as 28-year-old Danny Willett from England won. Even he knew.
It's just crazy, just surreal.
He wasn't even supposed to be there. His wife gave birth early, so he came and won. As for Spieth, he said there was just something he forgot to do.
I just didn't take that extra deep breath. This one will hurt. It'll take a while.
Tonight, golf great Jack Nicklaus tweeting, "I think the whole golfing world feels for Jordan Spieth. My heart goes out to him for what happened, but I know that Jordan is a young man who will certainly learn from this experience. We certainly haven't seen the end from Jordan Spieth." He'll be back, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Okay, so I show that example just so we can see what are some of the consequences or impact of stress. So for Jordan, 4-stroke lead, lost the tournament. I mean, the guy birdied the next 2 holes, so he definitely has some resilience. But known as the worst choke in golf history. Difference between first and second, anyone know the amount? $1 million, right? So when we look at some of those things, and I think it's partly, we're not talking, part of the stress management is the macro level, but it is also on that micro level and the impacts that can happen to you. So it's looking at, you don't have to be an Olympian. You don't have to be a Masters champion to notice the impacts of stress. And so it's looking at what consequences can those have, what consequence are those having on you. So now I'd like to actually turn it over to you when we're looking at demands and sources of stress, when we're looking at how you react and respond when feeling more overwhelmed. And so what I'd first like you to do is 2 things. Number 1 is I want you to think of what are your top sources of stress. Is it, maybe it's your work world. Is it family, talking to a few people about adult children and their struggles? Is it your transition into a different phase of life? So what is that top source or source of stress or demands? Secondly, how do you react? What's the impact that actually has on you? So the body, do you get headaches? Do you get tense? Do you worry a lot? Does your mind race? Do you tend to avoid things or maybe overfunction in certain moments? So what I want you to do, you have these beautiful books, is to just take a moment, write down top source of stress or demands and the impact that actually has on you. And then we'll have a discussion about that in a moment. Okay, so when we look at the sources of stress, and I don't need to know the story of Sally and Bobby and what happened, but what are some of those categories in terms of what are some of those sources of stress or demands that you face in this room? What would be some of those things if people are comfortable shouting some of those things out? Aging, yeah, absolutely. And aging families and how that works within your household, right? Yeah. Retirement. The transition, and as Kevin alluded to, I do quite a bit of work with executives and athletes on the psychology of transition. Change, I can go from this side of the stage to this side. That's easy. Transition is what happens inside of us, and it can be extremely stressful. Our identity, our impact, our structure in our day, absolutely. Other comments? Not being retired. I'm with you on that one. So the world of work, right, and our economy, yes. Yeah, and that's what we're finding. It's now that languaged as exponential change and our need and the pace and rate and also the competing priorities. It never seems to end, does it? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm talking about recovery. Where do we find time, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and this is what we're finding with our millennials. God love them, but they're not equipped, right? They don't handle stress well. They don't. The resilience is sometimes challenging, and so wanting to launch them, but at the same time needing to still support and help them in their journey. Yeah, and you said injury. Injury, yeah, absolutely. And now I find I had a mountain bike accident a while ago or a couple years ago, and it was my social world. It was my exercise. It was my outlet. It was everything. I didn't realize the impact that could have. Absolutely, yeah, great. So, yes? Mm. Well, yeah, and I've seen in my practice, I mean, there's a gender component to it, because also that depends on what roles were. There's also just a individual and more on the role, and sometimes not so gender, sometimes it's reversed, actually. But great point within the partnership, when there's more of a demand on one than the others, or not a lack of alignment on how we're going to do this, right? So thanks for bringing that up. So yeah, as you can see, many demand sources of stress. What impact is that having? What do you notice? So Jordan put his ball in the water. What happens to you when you're feeling that stress, that impact? What are some of those reactions? Yeah. Yeah. So mentally, we get discouraged, we get unmotivated. Absolutely. So absolutely on that emotional stream. Yeah. Any other comments in terms of what you experienced that you wish to share?
You mentioned sort of over-functioning as a way to control the situation.
Yeah.
I might get exhausted, or physically or mentally exhausted because of it.
That's right. And because the over-functioning in the brain, because really when you think about the brain, it's all about trying to mitigate or manage a perceived threat. Evolutionary psychology. We've got caveman, we've got dinosaur, right? And as soon as the caveman sees the dinosaur, heart starts to pound, mind starts to race, it either freezes or it does a whole bunch of things to protect itself, right? And so part of it is with that over-functioning, if I do this, then that will happen. We don't know. It just makes me feel better when I do more to try and predict the certainty of this outcome, right? But it leads to that exhaustion. Exactly. Some really great examples. And so if we look at how the body actually does respond under stress, it responds in 4 ways. So this is the psychology of a human. So physically, in the body, we get tension, we get headaches, we get that heart rate increase, stomach issues people will find. We heard the emotional world. So loss of confidence or that discouragement can get anxiety. Sometimes it can lead a little bit into that depression. The mind. It races and loops, and it wants to loop because it wants to try and solve the problem. It also, by looping, it actually decreases the intensity of the stress or the emotion you're experiencing, so it's almost like a distraction thing. So we'll loop and we'll loop and we'll loop, right? Memory issues or get more negative, and then lastly, those behaviors. So that avoidance or the over-functioning, sleep problems, which Rick's going to talk about in a moment, passive avoidance, which is drinking more or other substances, right? Any of these things look familiar to anyone in this room? Okay, so you're normal, good thing, right? And so the thing that we need to look at is a bit of stress is actually adaptive. It's helpful. It helps us perform, can get us, help us with that energy that we need to push through things in our life. The challenge is the chronic nature, consistent without that reprieve, without that recovery, can have damaging effects, will impact every system in the body. When we look at some of those effects of chronic stress, and I'm quoted in an article, I think in Edmonton, there was an Edmonton business, and they say, well, can stress kill you? And I guess, yeah, it can lead to Dr. MacNeill says stress can kill you, right? And really, if it's not managed, and if you get to those levels where you are not listening to those warning signs, then there can be severe consequence. Sure, you're not losing $1 million and putting your ball in the water, but what impact is it having to you, the most important asset in your life? If you're not good, then you can't do your work, you can't be there for your families, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to make sure we're mitigating this along the way. And so one of the strategies that we look at is that active awareness. We will often override. And if I ask the spouse in the room of the other spouse how often you went to work or were sick or were stressed and didn't stop, they'd probably say a lot, right? And so part of it is to give ourselves a little bit of a snapshot on where we're at. And so what I want you guys to do now is here's a little bit of a wellness snapshot. It's kind of some recovery and wellness indicators. Psychology and the stress, it's invisible. We see it in behaviors, or we see it in physical symptoms. Okay, so if you look through some of these factors, what I want you to do, red light, not so good for one of these things. Green, great. Yellow, comme ci, comme ça, right? So have a look through and give yourself a little bit of a quick scorecard on where you'd be on these factors. Okay, so how many people in the room are all green? I might challenge your awareness if you were, but yeah, so you're going to find a mix. How many people found that there was a smattering of scores within there? Some good, some bad, some yellows, yeah. And so part of it is just that awareness of where you're at. If you're all red, come see us at Copeman Healthcare Center. We have a fabulous team that can help in all these areas, right? And so this is really, the first step of it is really that awareness piece. Okay, so just a few little things that you can do or ideas of that. You know, once again at Copeman we have the comprehensive health assessment, things you can do. Do you have to go that intense to find, you know, some of these impacts of stress, or can you just do a simple monitoring tool such as this and just check in with yourself, right? So figure out what you may need in that regard. So let's shift a little bit and talk about, we all know that we have stress. We all know the impacts now. Let's see what are some of the things that we can actually do about it. And this quote in the Harvard Business Review, Jim Lohr, Tony Schwartz. So Jim is similar to my background, older, and he's worked with professional athletes, and he runs a full consulting business really on this whole idea of energy management. Wrote an article called The Corporate Athlete and talks about the real enemy of high performance. It's not stress. That's actually a stimulus for growth. Rather, the problem is the absence of disciplined, intermittent recovery strategies. So that chronic stress will deplete those energy reserves, lead to burnout and breakdown, and ultimately undermine performance. So here, part of it's performance, part of it's functioning, and really it is really about you and your well-being, right? So let's look at a few things that we can do. There are 4 pillars of recovery. When we look at the science and how it all shapes out, is these 4 pillars have kind of been acknowledged as being essential. And so the first one when we look at them is move often. All right, and so exercise. We know, as I said, that TED Talk, movement is really important. The Canadian Exercise Guidelines recommends around 2.5 hours of your cardio, or they call it moderate intensity. That's brisk walking, that's fine. 2 hours of more strength or a high intensity workout. So when you look at your week, that's about half an hour. They also say we get to chunk those into 10-minute increments if we want, right? So one strategy here is, you know, parking your car 10 minutes from work, walking in, walking out, you got your 20 minutes there, right? Do you guys know the best exercise that you should do? The one you're going to do, okay? And so that's the thing I find with exercise is there's a variety of different things, and everyone, for you, swim, go for it. For you, walk, right? It's what are you going to do? What's easy? If it is hard, then given that your fatigue and your tiredness to begin with, you're likely not going to do it. Eat for energy. All right, so we have all these diets and we have these different things about weight management, but when we're thinking about performance and stress for that matter, it's about thinking about how we map this out for energy. And so a few tips and guidelines that you can consider. So move often, eat for energy. So a few little tips around that. You've got your plate of food. Half of it, make sure for a well-balanced meal, half of it is veg, and you want it colorful because that's brain healthy foods, antioxidants, omega-3s, avocado, salmon, walnuts, those kind of things. You have your proteins and you have your grains. Okay, so well-balanced meal, making sure you have those brain healthy foods. Hydrate. Did you know it's now 12? Yep, wine. Okay, maybe not with that, but moderation. I know when we came in, I told you I'm not taking away your wine, right? Moderation, but 12 cups for females and 15 cups a day for men for drinking water is what's recommended. Granted, part of that's within your food, but they've upped the ante on us. They always want more, right? So hydrate is really important. So well-balanced meal, brain healthy foods, omega-3s, antioxidants, and hydrate. So on your piece of paper here, I skipped the move often. You can do that at the end. For the eat for energy, when you think about what's one small thing I can do differently over the next 2 weeks, what would that be? Okay, next recovery pillar is sleep, which Rick is going to do, and he'll do a deeper dive into that, so I'm going to leave that one alone. And then lastly, we talk about thinking clearly. Ramis Holgard is a fellow who's been around the world, going into organizations, mindfulness training, and he talks about the paid reality. Pressured, always on, information overload, and a constant stream of distractions. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Yeah, okay. And so one mitigation strategy for that is mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Deep awareness of this present moment in an open and curious way. So it's really about being here now. Mindfulness has been around for thousands of years, so why the attention? Because it works. The science is rich and deep in this. And when you look at some of the studies, improved sleep, ability to regulate stress and emotions, focus and attentional control, creativity and problem solving, so a lot of really good benefits. And so with mindfulness, there's some great apps. Headspace is one you might use or might know of that can just help get you into this training of it. In closing, we all have different demands, different sources of stress. It's not the stress and demands that are going to be going away. It's a matter of what you are doing to help your performance, your functioning. So really the clear message is to stress-proof your brain, figure out what is that daily dose of recovery that you need.